Chapter 38, the geminate verbs. This will be the second verb that we were calling the collapse form. And so this verb is going to be very similar to what we did back in Chapter 36 with the hollow verbs. These two verbs are very similar in the way we're going to have to approach them. And so as we look at these, again, we're going to have a collapsing of the verb. And when the verbs collapse, of course, it causes the form to look quite a bit different than what we're used to seeing. So this time, instead of the R2 vav quiescing and dropping out and R1 and R3 coming together, this time what we're going to have is R2 and R3 collapsing together. And so the first thing we want to do is look at strong areas, though, because this time, in contrast to the hollow verbs that had almost no strong verbs, we do have a few areas of strong verbs, and so we want to look at that. So look at section 3 of your chapter. And you can see that in the call third-person verbs, it's sometimes, and you definitely want to underline that word sometimes, you have what is strong verbs, and you can see savav and savava, savavu. These are strong forms. They should cause you no trouble whatsoever. When we go to the call participles, the same thing. We really have forms that are very strong looking, and they should cause you no problems, and the same for the call infinitives. But now we need to look at the remedies that we're going to have when we have R2 and R3 collapsing together. And so if you look at section 4, you can see the problem here. What happens is, what I like to describe this is like a car wreck. And the front of the car, though, would be here at the last letter of the bait. And so when we have impact, the second and third root letters crumple together. It's a real crash. So that though the thematic vowels in the front seat before long, look at this, it gets knocked in the back seat. That's a real car crash. And so that's the way I like to view it. When you collapse R2 and R3 together, the thematic vowel shifts to between R1 and R2. And if there's nothing at the, and now if you notice here, the performative is now in the pretonic open position, and so the original patach lengthens to a patach, to a kametz. So the original patach lengthens to a kametz, as you see here, with the thematic vowel shifting. So when we do these forms, we're going to collapse them. The thematic vowel, which we normally see between R2 and 3, now shifts and goes between R1 and R2. And again, if a performative is in the pretonic open position, it's going to lengthen. And if that performative is in a open propretonic position, however, what's going to happen is it's going to reduce to a vocal schwa, something we're used to. Okay, so if we have a collapsing, look at number 2 of our general remedies. If we have a collapsing of the verb, and when the verb collapses, if that verb does not have something on the end of it, some type of vocalic ending or pronominal suffix or some type of ending, we're going to have a hovering dagesh. And so you can see that here. Again, this word can be strong, savav, as we've already discussed. But we can also collapse it. And when we collapse it, notice again that the thematic vowel goes between R1 and R2. There's nothing on the end. We have a hovering dagesh. That hovering dagesh represents the R3. And if we put something on the other side of it, so with your 3CP, we put a shurik, the hovering dagesh lands, we say sabu, you see. Now we come to the syllabic suffixes. And for the syllabic suffixes, and again, we're basically going to deal with the call, the nifal, and the hifil. Those would be the forms that we look at mostly here. When we have syllabic suffixes for them, for the perfect, we're going to have the holem vav. And again, we saw the same holem vav for the hollow verbs back a couple of chapters. And so as I give you the example of it, you can see it here. Sabota, this is a call perfect to MS form. And for your imperfect imperative, you're going to have this segol yod. And again, last chapter we saw it's a contraction. And again, probably what happened in chapter 37 with the R3 Vav Yod, that paradigm is influencing the paradigm here of the geminates, and therefore it's used as a connecting vowel for your imperfect, call imperfect 2 and 3 FP forms, and you can see that with tesubena. Notice that the accent is shifting, and so your performative tav, the original patach there, is now in an open propretonic position. You get the reduction, you see. Now let's discuss the accent. Normally, again, this is very similar to your hollow roots. The thematic vowel normally takes the accent, and again, that's something you're used to from the hollow verbs. Also, when you look at participles, the participles will shift the accent down, and again, that's very similar to what you learned for your hollow verbs. And again, the connecting vowels for the consonantal suffixes, the holam vav or the sere yod for your imperfect, again, they will also take the accent. But in the perfect, as you can see here, if you have a heavy suffix, the tem-ten, it will carry it all the way to the end of the verb, as you see in the example I give you here. And finally, number 4, your pronominal suffixes also will always shift the accent off of the thematic vowel. You can see this with the example I give you here of a call imperfect 3ms with a 3ms energic suffix, yesubenu, you see. So those are general remedies, and by that I mean they will be applied to all conjugations that we look at. But now we want to do specific remedies, and the first one we want to do is the hafal. And again, the hafal is not too bad, because again, the hafal is going to really become an R1 yod original vav verb, you see. And so again, we're going to have this contraction of UW becoming a long U. And the thematic vowel here will, of course, for hafal being kami form, being red, should not cause us any problems. And so the hafal is not too bad here in its first syllable. But now we need to look at some other things about the hafal, some specific things we need to discuss. In the perfect, what I'm doing here is I'm showing you the form before we have the accident, before we have the collapsing. But notice here for the 3ms, we're collapsing, we have a hovering dagesh, but notice again the first syllable is again as if it were an R1 vav verb, you see. When we add a pronominal suffix, the hovering dagesh lands in R2 so that we can see the R3 also. And when we get to a 2ms form, we have a syllabic suffix, and so again we must attach that with the holam vav. And so again, those general remedies are being applied here to the hafal. The imperfect, the same way. I give you the form as reconstructed. Then we have the accident, but notice again that first syllable with the U again coming from the original vav, R1 original vav, with the hovering dagesh. Then I put a vocalic ending, which causes the dagesh to land. And then for the imperfect, I give the connecting suffix for your second and third feminine plurals, the segol yod. Again, it takes the accent also. But notice no reduction, because contraction is like a historic long. Now we come to the participle. Again, the first part of the verb is the contraction. And notice the hovering dagesh. When you add an ending, notice that the hovering dagesh lands. You have reduction here, but it's not reduction to a schwa. It's to a short vowel, because the patach is now in a closed unaccented syllable, or the kametz is in a closed unaccented syllable, so it gets reduced down to a patach here, as you can see here. Okay, so that's it for the hafal. The hafal is not very difficult to learn, again, because of its affinity to the R1 vav verbs. Now it comes to the hifil, and this really looks like the hollow verbs as we've discussed them before, because again, we want to look at performative vowels, and for the hifil you get the hirik for your perfect and your participle. And again, that's different from the strong verb that we've learned and from most weak verbs other than the hollows. Or again, it can be a patach for your imperfect, imperative, and infinitive. And then your thematic vowel this time is going to be a seire. But if it becomes in a closed unaccented syllable, it's a hirik. So originally the thematic vowel is a hirik. But with the way you're normally going to see it is a seire. It's not a hirik yod, so keep that in mind. That's different than the hollow verbs there. Now we do the specific observations. And again, what I'm going to do is exactly like I did with the hafal. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a perfect 3ms. Notice the hey of the performative of a hifil perfect I put there with the hirik. And there you see the seire. We've said that is going to be your thematic vowel. We're going to have the collision. And you can see the thematic vowel is knocked from the front seat to the back seat, as it were. We have the hovering dagesh. The hirik under the performative hey, now being in the pretonic open position, lengthens to a seire. And that's what you see in this example here. But with the 3fs, I'm adding a vocalic ending to the end, and therefore the hovering dagesh lands. And in your second masculine singular, we have a syllabic suffix. Therefore, we need something to connect it to the root. We use the holam vav. Again, the hovering dagesh lands. The accent's going to shift, and therefore the seire, which we have in a closed accented syllable, now must become a hirik because it's now in a closed unaccented syllable. And the performative vowel, hirik, is now in the open propretonic syllable. It has to reduce down to a schwa. Notice again, it's a composite because you have a hey, and you can have a chetef patach, and it's not impossible that you could have a segol, a chetef segol there. So watch for that. Now, as we go to the imperfect, again, we're going to work this the same way, except this time we have 3 different options of the imperfect, and so that's the real difficulty. First, we're going to say normal gemination, and normal gemination means that R2 and R3 are the 2 twins, namely they have the same letter. And so as we look at this, here we go again. Here's the reconstructed form. Notice again, we're still in the hifil. The performative vowel is patach. The thematic vowel is seire. When the accident occurs, notice the thematic vowel being shifted under R1 here with the hovering dagesh. And then the performative being in the pretonic open, the patach becomes a kametz. In a 3MP form, what I'm doing is putting some type of vocalic ending on there to show you the hovering dagesh landing. And then for your second and third feminine plural, we are having to use the connector in order to connect the root to the ending, this na ending. And so we're going to get this segol yod, which again attracts the accent, and therefore the seire that you normally see under the R1, which is your thematic vowel, has to reduce in a closed unaccented syllable to a short vowel, namely a hirik. And your patach that was under your tav is now in an open propretonic. Of course, it goes down to a schwa. You can see the jussive form is a special seire form, but all the thematic vowels are pretty much seire forms. And when you put the vav consecutive on, notice that the accent is retracted, and therefore the seire in a closed unaccented syllable must become a short vowel, namely segol. And again, I give you the hovering dagesh for this form because in a 3MP, the accent does not retract. You have an ending, the thematic vowel, the hovering dagesh lands. Via sebu is it for the 3MP, so I want to show you that to contrast it. But now we have a little difference that we did not have with the hollow verbs, and that is what we call transposition of gemination or metathesis of gemination. Normally, you geminate R2 and R3, but notice this time there's a transposing of the doubling of the gemination so that R1 is this time geminated. And if you ever take biblical Aramaic, you're going to see that this is the normal type of gemination that you see in biblical Aramaic. So this follows more of an Aramaic pattern here. And so again, we look at the form as we normally expect it, but this time in the second step, I change the gemination. Instead of the double bait, I get a double samic. But notice this time it does not follow the general remedies that we talked about earlier in the chapter. This is going to act more like a regular strong verb once you change the gemination. And so notice what you have here. You have the somic being geminated, and you got to be careful. You might think it's a R1 noon verb. You got to watch out for that. But you've got this yod here, and the yod is tipping you off along with the thematic vowel that you're looking at a hifil imperfect. So that can be tough. You got to watch out for that. Notice your 3MP. We add the vocalic ending, but no hovering dagesh to land. And then I give you the vav consecutive. Notice that the accent does not retract because it does not retract. It's got to retract to an open syllable with a long vowel. You don't have that here. And so you can see vaya save here. But then, guess what? You can even have double gemination. Now, the good news is you won't see double gemination very often. Metathesis of gemination, you will see that from time to time, but normally you're going to see that normal gemination. But here's double gemination. They're doubling R1 and R2. And so they're having a lot of fun with this, you can tell. And so notice here the somic is doubled and the bait is doubled. And you can see that also with the vav consecutive form. Again, this is more rare, but I do want to point that out to you. When we go to the imperative, the question is, well, you know, we always have derived the imperative from the imperfect. Which one are we going to pick? And the answer is the normal geminated form. So you go back to the normal generated form. And again, I'm doing that for you here. You still have the crash, sending the seire between R1 and R2 with the hovering dagesh, and then you're lengthening the patach to kametz. Then I show you with a vocalic ending, and that causes the hovering dagesh to land. And also show you another one, the 2MP. And then with the 2FP, obviously we get, again, the connector, which shifts the accent down. And so now the seire becomes a hiric and closed unaccented, and the performative vowel is now in an open pro-pretonic, and so it gets completely reduced down to a schwa. Then we have the infinitives. The infinitive absolute and construct will look identical this time. And again, you can see it's ha-save, which is identical to your imperative form. So now, normally in a hifil, the imperative 2ms and the infinitive absolute look identical, but this time both infinitives and the imperative 2ms will look identical, so you want to keep that in mind. When we come down to the participle, we can see the, basically the crunching of the form may save. With a feminine singular ending, the accent shifts, and so you get the appropriate corrections, namely a short vowel under R1, and the performative maim gets the complete reduction. And again, may save, I would expect ma save, but again, you can see it's probably somewhat analogous, let's say, to the R1 yod, original yod verbs. As you look back at that, you'll see the may T form. So again, you want to keep that in mind. Now we want to go to the nifal. And again, this time the nifal is really a nafal. And first we want to talk about the general observations that deal with the nifal. And that's the performative vowel. It's going to be a patach in your perfect and participle. That's why we're going to call it a nafal. And it's going to be an I or a hiric for your other forms, your imperfect, your imperatives, and your infinitives. And then again, your thematic vowels are going to be patach, patach, And so now we want to do the specific observations, and again we'll go through the steps, but quickly, of course. For your 3MS, we're going to have the collision, as it were, and so the thematic vowel is going to shift under R1, creating the hovering dagesh. The performative is in a pretonic open, it lengthens. When you add a vocalic ending, the hovering dagesh will land. And when you have a syllabic suffix, you have to have the connector, the holam vav, which I mentioned in the general remedies at the beginning of the chapter. And so here we are attaching the holam vav in order to connect the syllabic suffix. When you do that, there's a shifting of the accent, and therefore you get the patach under the somic still, because it's closed and accented, and you get a reduction, though, under the performative noon, as you see there. The participle works the same way, as you can see here. There is the thematic vowel, the irreducible long kamet. When I say irreducible, I mean irreducible down to a schwa. But when you have the collision of the form, the thematic vowel is thrown back under R1. And now you have the hovering dagesh. And then, again, the noon being in the pretonic open, you get lengthening. But if you add some type of adjectival nominal ending to it, then the hovering dagesh lands. The long kamets reduces, but not to a schwa, but to a patach, because it's closed and accented. The noon is now in the open propretonic position. It goes down to a schwa. When we come to the imperfects, imperatives, and infinitives, again, we have the collision. First of all, the first form I show you here is the noon of the nifal without assimilation, and I assimilate it here. And so here's the noon of the nifal being assimilated into R1. And then when we come to the second step here, we're now having the collision of the form, the thematic vowel being shifted under the R1 consonant. And that dagesh in the samach, of course, is the noon of the nifal. And then again, I give you some type of vocalic ending to show you the hovering dagesh landing. And then also I give you the second, third feminine plural, which gives you the connecting suffix, which shifts the accent. But notice no reduction because the noon of the nifal will keep the hirik safe from destruction. It's closed unaccented. And it's the same thing with the patach. And then with the vav consecutive form, you can see again the accent will not shift. It will stay there because, again, it has to shift back to an open syllable with a long vowel. You don't have that here. We come down now to the imperative. Again, I do the noon assimilation of the nifal first, then the collapsing of the form there. And then with your second feminine singular, you have your vocalic ending, and therefore the hovering dagesh lands. When we come down to the infinitive absolute and construct, notice that the thematic vowel is a holum. This is perhaps given from the strong verb here. And then for the construct, you get a sere. And again, that could be from the strong verb. So watch out for the infinitives, absolute and construct. Watch out for the thematic vowels there. You need to go back to your strong verb sort of to derive them. Okay, and then finally, you know where we're going. We've got to go to the feared one, and that is the call. Call is always where the problems occur. And so first we want to do some general observations and talk about performatives and thematic vowels. The performative is a patach with standard verbs and a hirik with stative verbs, and also with transposed geminated forms and doubly geminated forms. So just remember that. And then the thematic vowels, as we approach the thematic vowels, you can see that you get the AO with standard verbs, but you get the AA with stative verbs, and this is something that you would expect. Now we come down to the specific observations. I've already mentioned to you these strong forms again, and now I've collapsed them. These are just third persons that we're looking at here in the perfect. And now I'm giving you the stative forms. You get kal, which means light, and this is where we get our word call, as in call perfect, 3ms or something like that. And then the next form we get kala. Notice the vocalic suffix is added, the hovering dagesh has to land, but notice that the accent does not shift in these forms. For all other persons, you definitely get collapse forms. And in order to attach the syllabic suffix, we have to add this holum vav. And so you can see that in what we have here. Notice that the holum vav will, of course, attract the accent. And if you have the heavy suffixes, the tim, tin, notice that they take the accent all the way to the end of the word. Now for your imperfect. Again, we're going to have normal gemination and we're going to have transposition of gemination. And so here we have normal gemination. And so again, when the accident occurs, the thematic vowel thrown into the back seat with the hovering dagesh. And then the original patach is now left in an open pretonic position. It lengthens. When you put a vocalic suffix on, vocalic suffix, notice the hovering dagesh landing. With the second and third feminine plural, notice again the segol yod is the connector. It shifts the accent. And when that happens, notice how the holum is represented by a kibbutz. And that's a little different, but we've seen things similar to that before. Remember, we talk about, instead of a hafal, a hufal, for instance, in R1 noon verbs. Because oftentimes when you have a dagesh forte, instead of getting a kametz chatuf, which is very possible, by the way, you can get a kametz chatuf, but normally you'll get a kibbutz, and that's what I have here. And then again, your performative is now in the open propretonic position. You get reduction. For the jussive, notice that you get the holum as your thematic vowel here in the jussive. And so the jussive and the imperfect do look alike. When you put the vav consecutive, again, you do not want to pronounce this vayasav. That would be terrible. Vayasov. That's a kametz chatuf under the samek. So vayasov is the way you want to pronounce it. And with the vav consecutive 3 and p, vayasobu. Notice here no retraction of stress because, again, it's not a closed unaccented syllable at the end. And then I give you the stative over here. Notice your performative is a seire. And patach is your thematic vowel. You, again, have a vocalic ending, and so therefore you land the hovering dagesh, and it works really the same way. But notice here in the vav consecutive, again, we can retract the tone or the stress, the accent, because again it's closed an accent at the end and it's going back onto an open syllable with a long vowel. And then I give you the vav consecutive with a 3 and p. There it will not retract again, because again, anytime you have some kind of ending, it's not ending in a closed syllable, so you can't retract it. Next is, again, the metathesis of gemination or the transposition of gemination. So again, instead of doubling R2 and R3, making them the same letter, so R2 twice, let's say, we're going to double now R1 twice, and that's what you see here. And so in the 3MS, notice that I double the samek, not the bait. So I go from what you expect and basically double the other. And again, we're doubling that, and this again will not follow the general remedies that I mentioned before. And so again, these are going to act more like a standard verb. It's going to look a lot like a R1 noon verb, and so we've got to watch out for that. And with your 3 and p, notice there's no dagesh in the bait because that's not being doubled. And then notice your second and third feminine plural, tisovna. Again, it's acting more like a verb, again, like an R1 noon verb. There's your jussive with your vav consecutive. You're not going to retract the stress there. For your imperatives, again, the imperatives are going to go back to the normal gemination. They're not going to go back to the metathesis of gemination. And so I show you that here. I take an imperfect, just basically take off the performative and its vowel. You get sov with a hovering dagesh and any type of vocalic ending. And you're going to get the hovering dagesh landing. Notice your 2FP, you get the connecting vowel segol yod. And then the participles and infinitives are just like strong verbs, so there's no problem there. Then I give you a couple of final considerations that you need to look at. One is these transposed gemination. Transposed gemination is possible in the kal, nifal, hifil, and hafal. So you can have transposition of gemination in all of these forms. And number 2 is one that will make your heart stop beating, and that is geminate verbs have many mixed forms with R2 vav yod verbs. So sometimes you can have a root that really looks like an R2 vav, but yet it'll act like a geminate verb. Or sometimes you'll get a root that you know is a geminate, and it acts as if it's a hollow root. And when that happens, life becomes a little difficult for you. It's not super common, and that's the good news, but it does happen from time to time, and I give you some examples. Well, now it's time to do some forming and parsing of these forms. And again, the steps that we're going to do are the same steps that we did for the hollows. And therefore, we're going to talk about performative vowel, thematic vowel, then we're going to talk about the call, and then we're going to talk about the general remedies, establishing accent and those types of things. And so, Let's go ahead and start with the example I give you, a hifil cohortative singular savav. And so we're doing a cohortative, which is like an imperfect. And so what I'm going to do, again, is I'm going to start with the form already collapsed. And so the accident has already happened. And so I've already put the two baits together, as it were. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to start with the performative. And we're doing a hifil. And so we need a patach for the performative vowel. And again, since I've already crushed it, I'm going to put a hovering dagesh there to remind me that we're going to have some problems. Now again, if I give you any of these imperfects, consider them all normal gemination. If I tell you transposition of gemination or metathesis of gemination, then you do it. But otherwise, always go with the normal. Okay, so now the next step is going to be, of course, the thematic vowel. And for the hifil, it's a seire. And so we'll go ahead in the second step and put our seire there. And so the next form, of course, is going to be the call. And for the call, it's ektala, it's singular. That's correct. And so, of course, what you do is you put a hey on the end of it with a kametz. And when you do that, the hovering dagesh is going to land. And so you see the gemination. And then there's another thing we've got to change, and that is with that form that I just ektala, you have an aleph on the front. And so we'll go ahead and change the etan yod to the aleph that's there. Now, the next thing we have to do is look at let's say, the general remedies, and especially the establishing of the accent, and then the working of the rules. And normally, remember, for the rules of accent, is the thematic vowel takes the accent. You would need some type of connecting suffix or some type of heavy suffix or a pronominal suffix added to a verb or participle. That throws the tone. But this time we simply have the thematic vowel, and that will take it. And so when we crunch the rules, this patach is in the open pretonic position. We'll make it a long kametz. And so this is going to be my answer, aseba. All right. And then, of course, I give you another example, but let's skip down to the parsing and look at the parsing. The form I have is this. Okay, as I look at the form, and we'll go ahead and put the accent here too. As I look at the form, again, the first thing I would do is start thinking about boxes, colors, and call. And as you look at this, you could say, well, I do see a box here. I see what looks like a PL box, like maybe a PL imperfect. But the problem with that is